Imagine this. You've got the most electrifying player in women's basketball on your roster. A generational talent. Someone who single-handedly filled arenas across the country and brought TV ratings the WNBA had never seen before. You've got a fan base that's hungry, expectations that are sky-high, and an off-season so chaotic that every single day counts more than ever. Now imagine your head coach decides that instead of locking herself in a film room, grinding through scouting reports, and fighting to keep your best free agents from walking out the door, she's going to fly to South Carolina to call college basketball games on television. That's not a hypothetical. That's exactly what's happening with the Indiana Fever right now. Stephanie White, the woman tasked with turning this franchise into a championship contender, committed to broadcasting NCAA tournament games for ESPN during the most compressed and unpredictable offseason in WNBA history. And Fever fans are furious. 3 players. That's all the Fever have under contract heading into 2026. 3. Free agency is a madhouse. Expansion drafts are looming, and the clock is ticking louder than ever. So, why is the head coach behind a broadcast desk instead of behind a whiteboard? Let's get into it. Here's where the frustration starts. In March, news broke that Stephanie White had committed to calling NCAA tournament
Don't forget
games
to subscribe
for ESPN.
and turn on the notification
She was
bell
spotted in
so you
Columbia,
never
South
miss a video.
Carolina, working first and second round matchups at Colonial Life Arena. She wasn't just doing one game either. She was on the call for multiple broadcasts, with the possibility of additional games depending on which teams advanced through the bracket. And it didn't stop there. White also worked the Final Four open practices in Tampa alongside Kelsey Riggs-Cuff and Carolyn Peck, adding even more days away from Fever operations. On top of all that, she served as an assistant coach for Team USA during the FIBA World Cup qualifying tournament in Puerto Rico. Now, let's be fair for a second. White has been with ESPN since 2007. Broadcasting is part of her professional identity. She's covered both men's and women's NCAA tournament games for nearly 2 decades. In January, she even called her first NBA game, working the Raptors Magic matchup. Nobody's saying she isn't talented behind the microphone. But here's where it gets complicated. There's a massive difference between taking on broadcasting work during a normal off-season and doing it during this off-season. The timing couldn't be worse. While White was prepping for tournament broadcasts, studying the storylines of college teams she'd be covering, and traveling between broadcast locations, over 100 WNBA players were hitting the open market. Free agency was exploding. Teams were making moves at a pace nobody had seen before. And the Fever? They were sitting there with 3 players on the roster and a head coach who was splitting her attention between 2 jobs. It's not just about the physical days she spent away from the team either. It's the mental bandwidth. Preparing for a national broadcast takes hours of film study, stat review, and storyline research, all for teams and players that have absolutely nothing to do with the Indiana Fever. Every hour spent prepping for an ESPN telecast was an hour not spent breaking down game film, calling free agents, or scheming offensive sets for Caitlin Clark. Fans noticed. Media noticed. And the criticism started piling up fast. Some called it tone-deaf. Others called it a slap in the face to a fan base that's been waiting years for this franchise to take the next step. But that frustration was only the beginning, because the deeper you look at what this offseason demands, the worse this decision looks. To understand why this hit so hard, you have to understand what made the 2025 to 2026 offseason a total pressure cooker. After roughly 17 months of back-and-forth negotiations, the WNBA and its players' union finally reached an agreement on a new collective bargaining agreement. The deal was ratified in early 2025, and it changed everything. The salary cap exploded from around $1.5 million to $7 million. That single shift created a domino effect that rippled through every front office in the league. Suddenly, teams had money to spend that they'd never had before. Players who were locked into modest deals were now staring at life-changing paydays. and the entire structure of how rosters get built had to be rethought from scratch. But the timing of the ratification created a logistical nightmare. Because negotiations dragged on so long, free agency got pushed back. In previous years, most roster moves were wrapped up by January or February. Coaches had weeks, sometimes months, to settle into their off-season preparation with a mostly complete roster in hand. Not this time. Free agency didn't open until April, and when it did, more than 100 players flooded the market at once. Every team in the league was scrambling simultaneously. That alone would have been enough to make this off-season historically chaotic. But there was another wrinkle that made things even more intense. Two expansion teams were entering the league. The Portland Fire and the Toronto Tempo were preparing for their inaugural seasons, and that meant expansion drafts were on the calendar. Every existing team had to decide which players to protect and which ones they could afford to lose. Those decisions required deep roster evaluation, film study, and strategic planning, the kind of work that takes weeks of focused attention. Everything was stacked on top of everything else. Free agency, expansion drafts, the regular draft, training camp, preseason games, all compressed into a window that was tighter than anything the league had ever dealt with. Other coaches around the league were buried in war rooms. They were on the phone with agents. They were watching film until their eyes burned. That's what this offseason demanded. And that's exactly why Stephanie White's decision to take on ESPN duties felt so jarring. Every other coach was treating this like a 5-alarm fire. And the Fever's head coach had one foot out the door. But the roster situation makes it even more alarming. Let's talk about who was actually on the Indiana Fever's roster heading into this offseason. Because it wasn't a lot. 3 players. That's it. Caitlin Clark, Aliyah Boston, Makayla Timpson. Everyone else? Gone. Either their contracts expired, or they were heading into unrestricted free agency, or they were vulnerable to being poached by one of the 2 expansion teams. The biggest name on that free agent list was Kelsey Mitchell. And if you watched the Fever at all last season, you know how critical she was. Mitchell averaged over 19 points per game during the regular season. She provided veteran stability in a locker room full of young players. She gave Indiana a second scoring threat that defenses couldn't ignore, which opened up the floor for Clark in ways that don't always show up in the box score. Losing her wasn't just a possibility. It was a real threat. When asked about off-season priorities, GM Amber Cox made it crystal clear that re-signing Mitchell was at the top of the list. But words don't mean much in free agency. Actions do. Speed does. And every team in the league had cap space to burn under the new CBA. Mitchell wasn't just going to sit around waiting. She had options. Real ones. Then there was Sophie Cunningham, who'd become a fan favorite and a key contributor off the bench. Natasha Howard, a veteran presence in the front court. Brianna Turner, another key piece of the rotation. All of them were free agents. All of them had leverage in a market where teams were desperate to fill rosters quickly. The expansion draft added another layer of stress. The Fever could only protect a limited number of players from being selected by Portland or Toronto. That meant front office decisions had to be precise. You protect the wrong player, you lose someone valuable. You leave the wrong person exposed, and an expansion team swoops in. These aren't decisions you make casually. They require hours of film review, statistical analysis, conversations with coaching staff, and strategic projections about how each player fits into next season's plans. And all of this needed to happen within a compressed timeline that left almost no room for error. 3 players under contract, a franchise cornerstone in free agency, expansion drafts looming, and the head coach was preparing to call basketball games on television. The roster wasn't just thin, it was a crisis waiting to happen. And then there's the player at the center of it all. If there's one reason Stephanie White should have been locked in a film room every single day this offseason, it's Caitlin Clark. Because Clark's 2025 season was nothing short of a nightmare, and the work required to build around her going forward is enormous. Clark only played 13 games. 13. A left quad strain started it. Then, a left groin injury followed. Then a right groin injury piled on top of that. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, an ankle bone bruise kept her sidelined even longer. In those 13 games, she still managed to average 16.5 points, nearly 9 assists, 5 rebounds, and over 1.5 steals per game. Even banged up, even limited, she was still one of the most dynamic players on the floor every time she stepped between the lines. But here's the wild part. The Fever still made the playoffs without her. They finished 24-20, grabbed the 6th seed, and fought all the way to the semifinals for the first time in a decade. They pushed the Las Vegas Aces to 5 games before falling in overtime of the deciding matchup. That tells you 2 things. First, the supporting cast showed up when it mattered. Second, imagine what this team could do with a fully healthy Clark playing a full season. That's not a dream, it's a real possibility. Clark proved she was past the injuries when she joined Team USA for the FIBA World Cup qualifying tournament. She didn't just play, she dominated. A double-double in her national team debut. MVP of the entire qualifying window. 5 games, 5 wins, and Clark looked every bit like the generational talent everyone knows she is. She put the injury-wrecked 2025 firmly in the rearview mirror. So now the question becomes simple. How do you build around that? How do you construct a roster and a system that takes everything Clark does well and amplifies it? Last season, even before the injuries, there were stretches where Clark looked uncomfortable playing off the ball. There were possessions where she stood in the corner, while others ran the offense. There were defensive schemes opponents used that clearly gave her trouble. Fixing those issues takes obsessive film study. It takes creative offensive scheming. It takes roster construction that puts the right players around her. And it takes a head coach who's thinking about nothing else. Which brings us to the standard that championship coaches are held to. Let's put this in perspective by looking at how the greatest coaches in sports history handled their business during critical moments. Nick Saban didn't pick up side gigs during recruiting season. When the biggest high school prospects in the country were making their decisions, Saban was in living rooms, on the phone, watching tape, doing whatever it took to build Alabama's next championship roster. Bill Belichick wasn't moonlighting as a television analyst while New England was navigating free agency. Every ounce of his energy went into roster construction, game planning, and preparation. Joe Torre wasn't calling playoff games for another network while managing the Yankees during their dynasty years. These coaches understood something fundamental. Championship-level success demands championship-level focus. There's no room for divided attention when the stakes are this high. And Stephanie White isn't some unproven coach either. That's what makes this so confusing. She won WNBA Coach of the Year in 2023 with the Connecticut Sunday. She became the first rookie head coach in league history to lead a team to the WNBA Finals. She took over the Fever and guided them to the semifinals in her first season, despite losing her best player to injuries for most of the year. Her resume says she's elite. Her basketball mind is clearly sharp. So why dilute that focus now, during the most pivotal offseason this franchise has ever faced? There's also the message it sends to the locker room and to potential free agents. If you're Kelsey Mitchell and you're weighing offers from multiple teams, you want to know that your head coach is all in. You want to feel like the franchise is prioritizing winning above everything else. You want to see urgency. When your coach is on an ESPN broadcast instead of on the phone selling you on the vision for next season, what does that communicate? When your coach is breaking down college matchups instead of breaking down film of your playoff loss, what signal does that send? Perception matters in free agency. Players talk, agents talk, and the narrative around a franchise can influence decisions in ways that don't always make headlines. The Fever need to be operating with a singular, obsessive focus on building a championship roster. Anything less than that, and they risk falling behind teams that are treating this offseason like the emergency it is. But the salary conversation happening behind the scenes adds yet another fascinating layer to all of this. Now, let's address something that's been buzzing all over the internet. The salary difference between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese heading into their new contracts under the updated CBA, because the numbers tell a story that a lot of people don't want to hear. In 2024, both players were making roughly the same money. Clark earned around $78,000. Reese came in at roughly $73,000. Rookie-scale deals. Nothing glamorous. Both players were underpaid relative to the attention and revenue they generated. That's just how the old CBA worked. But the new agreement changed the game entirely. Under the updated CBA, there's something called the EPIC provision, which stands for Exceptional Performance on Initial Contract. It's designed to fast-track elite rookies to maximum salary levels earlier in their careers, based on on-court accolades and achievements. And this is where the gap opens up in a major way. In 2026, Clark's salary is projected to jump to around $530,000. By 2027, she could earn up to $1.3 million, and by 2028, reports suggest she could hit the Supermax threshold of approximately $1.7 million. Those numbers are possible because Clark earned all WNBA honors, which unlocked the higher salary tiers under the EPIC provision earlier than the standard timeline. Reese, on the other hand, is projected to go from roughly $81,000 to around $390,000 in 2026. Her 2027 projection sits at approximately $395,000. Still a significant raise, absolutely, but the gap between the two is undeniable. By 2027, Clark could be earning nearly $1 million more per season. Now, a lot of people want to turn this into a rivalry debate. Who's better? Who deserves more? Who brings more value? But the reality is simpler than that. The system rewards specific on-court achievements. All WNBA selections, statistical benchmarks, team success markers. Clark hit those benchmarks. The CBA structure did the rest. It's not personal, it's contractual. What this also means for the Fever is that Clark's escalating salary has cap implications. If you're paying Clark over $500,000 and you need to re-sign Mitchell and add depth pieces, every dollar matters. Roster construction under the new cap requires precision, foresight, and a head coach who understands how every piece fits together financially and strategically. And that brings us to the biggest question of all. Let's play this out. Let's imagine the worst-case scenarios that could unfold because of divided attention during this critical window. Scenario 1. Kelsey Mitchell signs with another team. Maybe the Fever were a day late on their offer. Maybe another franchise made her feel more wanted. Maybe the negotiation timeline slipped because the coaching staff wasn't fully aligned with the front office on priorities. Suddenly, Indiana's second-best scorer is gone, and there's no equivalent replacement available in a market that's already been picked over. Scenario 2. The expansion draft goes sideways. The Fever miscalculate their protection list because they didn't have enough time to fully evaluate every player on the roster. Portland or Toronto grabs someone Indiana assumed was safe, and now there's a hole in the rotation that can't be easily filled. Scenario 3. Training camp starts, and the offensive system isn't fully developed. White hasn't had enough time to install the schemes she wants because the off-season prep was fragmented. The first few weeks of the season look sloppy. Rotations are inconsistent. Players look confused. Early losses pile up, and suddenly the Fever are chasing a playoff spot instead of competing for a top seed. Scenario 4. Caitlin Clark's talents aren't maximized. The off-ball issues from last season carry over because there wasn't enough time to study the film and design solutions. Clark spends another season standing in the corner on possessions where she should be the primary creator. The offense looks stagnant in key moments, and the Fever flame out in the first round. Any one of those scenarios would be a disaster. All of them are preventable with the right level of preparation and focus. Nobody is saying Stephanie White is a bad coach. Her track record proves otherwise. She's won awards, made finals, and earned the respect of players and peers across the league. But even the best coaches can make decisions that come back to haunt them. And this one has the potential to define her tenure in Indiana if things go wrong. The Fever have everything they need: a generational star in Clark, a rising talent in Boston, organizational support, fan enthusiasm, and national attention. What they need now is a head coach who's locked in like it's Game 7 every single day. Because in this offseason, it basically is. So here's where we land. This isn't about whether Stephanie White loves coaching. She clearly does. This isn't about whether she's qualified. Her resume speaks for itself. This is about timing. This is about recognizing when a moment demands your complete, undivided, obsessive commitment and acting accordingly. The 2025 to 2026 offseason broke every precedent in WNBA history. The CBA shakeup, the expansion drafts, the compressed free agency window, all of it collided at once. And the Indiana Fever, with just 3 players under contract and a generational superstar recovering from an injury-wrecked season, needed their head coach locked in more than ever. Every other team in the league is treating this like a 5-alarm fire. The Fever should be doing the same. If Indiana comes out next season and dominates, nobody will remember any of this. But if they stumble, if the roster looks incomplete, if Clark's talents go underutilized again, if Mitchell walks and nobody adequate replaces her, this moment will be circled in red. What do you think? Is this a real concern, or is it being blown out of proportion? Drop your take in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed, because we'll be tracking every move the Fever make between now and tip-off. Stay locked in with my channel Simply Explained, your home for the truth behind the WNBA headlines.